You are listening to the Becoming the Wealthy You podcast with Jermaine Foley. If you're a woman who makes good money in your career or business, but you're not building wealth like you want to, then you're in the right place. In this podcast, you'll learn how to stop overspending, break free from the cycle of debt, save lots of cash, and become the wealthy woman you were born to be. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of sharing an interview I did with Shannah Game from the Everyone's Talking Money podcast. And we talked all about her brand new book titled Unraveling Your Relationship with Money. You all, this conversation is so rich because we discuss topics and ideas that go way beyond the traditional personal finance topics that you'll hear on most financial podcasts, right? We talk about topics like why your relationship with money is so messed up. We talk about money trauma and money shame and how to get rid of both of them. We also talk about how to create your own money hero story, right? We all have our own money stories, but Shannah helps us to create our own money hero story. And so I'm so excited for you all to just really dive in to this episode. This one is a little longer because it's an interview. So a pro tip is to speed it up a bit. Listen to it on 1.25 speed or even 1.5 speed so that you can get all of this goodness and really hear what Shannah has to say to you all. Because I'm telling you, in our conversation, we just scratched the surface of all of these topics that I just mentioned. And we go much deeper and cover other ideas and concepts as well. And so because we just scratched the surface, I highly encourage you to go and grab Shannah's new book. Again, it's called Unraveling Your Relationship with Money. You can actually grab it by going to the show notes and clicking on the link there and ordering yourself a copy, or you can pick up the book wherever books are sold. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the interview. Shannah, I am so excited to have you here today. Your book, Unraveling Your Relationship with Money, is such a powerful read. I know my audience is going to love it, and I just appreciate you for saying yes to this conversation.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited.
Me too. So before we dive in, how about you go ahead and just introduce yourself to my audience just in case they don't know you. Tell them all about who you are and why you love this work so much.
Wow. Yes. So I joke that I have been an entrepreneur since I came out of the chute, so to speak. I love creative ideas, and I started my first business in college, which was one of the first national student film festivals, and ran that for about 5 years. Ended up selling it. And then I was like, what do I do with all these weird skills that I have? Got an MBA, and my father had been working in the financial industry for his whole career. And he was like, hey, how about you come join my company because I'm kind of bored. So I thought, why not? And it was really the beautiful foundation to the work I do today, because I got to work with people who had a ton of money and people who were just starting out. And what I saw was that we're all so similar. We all make versions of the same quote unquote mistakes. We're just dealing with different denominations, but we all get hung up on the same things. And that really led to this curiosity for me to explore this kind of trauma relationship with money piece, this kind of weird thing that isn't really talked about. I'm also a certified financial planner and a certified trauma of money expert. I've taught financial literacy for years and years, and I started my podcast originally called Millennial Money in 2015, and we since changed the name to Everyone's Talking Money, and it's just this weird thing that took off that I've been doing for 10 years that has kind of led me to this moment and what I feel is a really impactful message, especially for women who understand emotions, but don't always understand how they play out when we're dealing with money.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. And as you said, you've been an expert in this industry for years, coaching people through all of their money struggles. And you've seen like people with a lot of money struggling and people with no money struggling, and probably vice versa. But what inspired you to write this book that focuses on the emotional side of money and not just the strategy and the numbers and all that?
Money is not just math. I would say actually a small percentage of financial success is the math piece. That's the easy piece. We can plug that into a calculator. There are so many resources, like we can do that piece. It's this piece that is the hardest part that makes up, I think, 90% of the decisions you do or do not make with money, right? It makes up your habits, it makes up your beliefs and your thoughts. And so this is the piece that isn't easily plugged in anywhere, right? And this is the piece that's really personal. So I knew that I did not want to write another just traditional money book. There are plenty of really amazing ones out there, so many I could recommend, but I wanted to write something that felt really true to me and my experience, especially working with women, seeing where people get stuck. And so I've always kind of described myself as like a bridge builder that no matter what I do, like people are on one side of the bridge and they're stuck. And what excites me is trying to figure out how to get them to the other side of the bridge, like how to have this real true transformation, not just like hand off a 50-page financial plan to someone and say, here, you take it from here, which I know doesn't work. So it's a it's a new way to talk about money. And I think part of my fear around it was that people wouldn't understand it. And so when I approached this book, I wanted to be super transparent with my story that, hey, look, I've made so many mistakes and other people's stories in there so that I'm hoping the reader can kind of find themselves in there and feel a little bit of a release, like, okay, if she can do it, if these other people can figure this stuff out, like I can do this too.
Yeah, I love that. And that's one of the things I always say. It's like, listen, my money was a hot mess. If I can do it, you can do it. So I love that you are also saying that because it's so true and it just gives people so much hope. So I love how the book is laid out. You lay it out in three different parts. So I'm going to take each part and ask questions, and you just tell us what you were thinking, elaborate, let us know what was in your head. Because I tell you guys, this book is so good, you have to get it. Again, it's called Unraveling Your Relationship with Money. And Shannah's going to tell us how to get our hands on it definitely later. But okay, so part one was all about why your relationship with money is messed up. So you say that our thoughts about money shape our feelings. And those thoughts drive our actions and our patterns. Break this down for us. I talk about this a lot, but I want to hear your take on this.
Well, as you know, what we're thinking is so powerful. And I don't remember the actual number, but it's something like we have like 80,000 thoughts a day or something ridiculous like that. And I did this exercise once, and it was so powerful for me that I just like implored everybody else to do it, where I opened the like notes app on my phone. And every time I had a thought, I wrote a one for positive or a two for negative. And when I got to the end of the day, I mean, almost all of them were twos, almost all negative thoughts. And I thought, okay, this is crazy. Like, we are so trained to think negatively about money. We're so trained by the media and how we grew up and just the way people talk about money and social media and all of it to think that we're the worst person, that we don't know anything about money. How dare we try to build this thing called wealth? And we should just never be given like another dollar, right? That's really that like internal terrible voice that plays in our head around money. So for me, if we want to figure out whether you want to pay off debt or you want to buy a house or start a business or you just want to not feel so anxious around money, we've got to start back at that thought piece. And I tell everyone, like, the first thought that comes in your mind around money is usually going to be something negative, and that's fine. Like, just let that one come. But the second thought, you actually have some control over. So if your first thought is, oh my gosh, I've made all of these terrible money mistakes and I'm so far behind. your second thought could be, okay, let me choose something different. Like today I paid my mortgage and my credit card bill and I made a smart choice when I was eating out. I don't know, right? Okay, maybe I'm not so bad with money, right? Okay, well, that's going to then influence a different feeling. Maybe you're going to feel slightly more optimistic or, okay, I could do this thing, right? And then that's going to influence your actions that you take around money and your patterns and behaviors. But if we're stuck in this, I'm so terrible, I've done everything wrong place, we're not going to take the actions that we need to take that move us closer. We end up actually doing the opposite, right? So, you know, this like people who are in debt, and I've been in and out of debt many times in my life, which I'll be super transparent about. You almost become accustomed to that place, to that negative feeling, even though you don't like it. So you end up making decisions that move you back to that place. And it's so counterintuitive, but I really think it starts with thinking about what you're thinking about, which sounds kind of crazy to put it that way, but try that exercise. Try it for even just an hour. Like write down, a one or a two for your thoughts and just look at it because I guarantee you're gonna be you're gonna have this like aha, like, wow, okay, that voice is really nasty. And I need to see if I can get, better control over that.
Oh my gosh, so good. So I was trained by the life coach school and we use something called the motto. And when I first heard the concept of your thoughts create your feelings, I was like, really? Like, I just thought my feelings came from nowhere. And it just gives you so much power. Like, oh, I can actually influence my feelings. So I love that you talk about this. It's one of the first things you talk about. And I think it's the perfect place to start because until you get a hold of your thinking and your mindset, I mean, the strategies, to your point, they don't last. So good.
Yeah, and it's also, I want to say this like it's not your fault, right? It's not your fault that you're filled with these thoughts. We are sort of programmed all around us around money, especially as women, something I know we'll probably talk about, but when we talk about like trauma around money, a lot of that comes generationally from the women before us. And if we think about, our grandparents and our great grandmas and grandmas before that and what they experienced around money and how they were left out of rooms and couldn't get credit cards, let alone, right? We talk about, people of color. I mean, it's no wonder that we have these just sort of built in terrible thoughts. So I want everybody listening, like if you're thinking bad about yourself, this is you're swimming in the same boat, you're rowing in the same boat as all of the rest of us. It's like we're pushing, uphill against wind to try to change our thoughts to something positive. But I think doing so is really it's almost to me like a form of resistance, like of power, right? We're standing up and saying like, no, I'm not going to go with the status quo. I'm going to give myself permission to change this whole thing so that I can have like a different human experience.
Absolutely. And you get to decide what you want to believe. You don't have to just believe what society says about, the fact that we are frivolous, we're bad with money, we're not good at math and all the things that are just simply lies. So I love that you start there. So I also love the fact that you talk about treating your money like you're in a relationship with it. So, okay, you got to give us all the details around that. Explain how this idea helps people to reconnect with their finances.
This is a concept that the way that I talk about it, that I hope it lands with people, is I want you to think about if you're dating someone or you're in a relationship with someone. I hope that if that person treated you terribly, if they talked bad on you, if they judged you, if they blamed you, if there was guilt or any of that, you'd be like, okay, like see you later. I'm not interested in this relationship. But our relationship with money, besides ourself, is probably the longest relationship we're ever going to be in. It follows us our entire lifetime. So I really feel like we owe it to ourselves to cultivate a relationship that is good, right? That is healthy, that feels comfortable. And so that really piggybacks on what we were just talking about and what you were saying so beautifully about that we get to choose, right? Our thoughts. What's the same thing? We get to choose our relationship with money. It can either be super contentious, rooted in judgment, shame, and blame, or it could be, looked at as more of a partnership. And how do we work together with this weird thing called money, almost if we're imagining it as a person to help us, get to the place that we want to be in. So I really think that if you think about it from that perspective of like, oh my gosh, this thing is a relationship that I'm in. Is it good? Is it bad? What do I even want it to be? And those are things we never spend time thinking about when we're talking about money, but it's at the core, I think, so important because it really drives everything, the decisions we make and the vision we have for our lives and all of that.
Yeah, and you just hinted to this. You said our relationship with money is the longest relationship we've ever been in. So, how do childhood experiences shape our behaviors financially when we're adults?
Yeah, there is a really scary scientific stat out there that by the age of about 6 or 7, our money personality is pretty much set. And I don't know about you, but that really like terrifies me because I don't remember a whole lot before age probably 6 or 7. Like those memories are not super concrete. But when I look at, I'm a big advocate of therapy. When I look at the things that I talk about in therapy, they're rooted in those early child development years. And, for example, like in my family, because my dad was in the financial industry, we talked about like, big concepts around money. And we talked about being the best and being number one and all of these messages that got really confusing in my head. And so when I was in my 20s, just out of college, I racked up a huge amount of debt because I thought, oh, the way you're supposed to do this is buy all the things so that you look really, sophisticated and, people want to be your friend because you're driving the best car and you've got the house and all of those things. And, quickly I learned like that is not actually good for me as a human. That was what I was mimicking from my childhood. And so I think really thinking about this is called your money story, how you were raised around money, what the messages were, what the beliefs were, what was talked about, and also what wasn't talked about, right? Maybe it was just a feeling or an emotion in your household that every time now you think about money or you interact with it, you put yourself in that same place, like you're feeling those same emotions. It's really important because that's our past and we cannot change that. But the beauty of this is that I want you to write what I call your money hero story. This is your version going forward. This is you with your cape on. What do you want this to look like? And to know just what you were saying, that you have the power to create something different than what you saw or didn't see growing up. But yeah, our childhood years are freakishly important to unraveling all of this.
Yeah, so I have two sisters. And in your book, you give a great example of siblings growing up in the same household, experiencing the same factual things, but they walk away with completely different relationships with money. And when I look at the three of us, I can see that 100%. So can you share some examples of how that happens or why that happens?
It's really because we're all so different and, we all internalize these messages in a different way. So, for instance, where I got, sucked into this idea that I had to be perfect, I had to make all the right decisions, if I forgot to pay something or I went into debt, like I was the most horrible person in the whole world. My brother had a completely different relationship with money. Like for me, independence, being my own boss, um, maybe even taking on a little more risk is super comfortable for me. For him, it's not at all. He wants complete like corporate safety. He wants to stack as much money as humanly possible. He doesn't do a lot of like extracurricular things to enjoy life. It's just about stacking up money. So, I think it's important to look at how unique we are as individuals, and we're, even though we came from the same, body, we are so different in how we receive these messages, the thoughts going on in our head, and then how we, internalize this and move through our relationship with money. So a lot of people, I find, get stuck in comparison with their siblings, especially if they feel like there should be, for instance, I worked with someone who, she was the eldest and she felt like she was behind where her younger sisters were. And even though she loved them and supported them and wanted the best for them, she, in money coaching would talk about how envious she felt, and she didn't want to feel that way, like especially around the holidays. She wanted to be able to afford all the gifts for the nieces and nephews and meet her sisters where she was at, but she couldn't do that without going into massive debt. And so it was really about like reprogramming, well, how does she want to show up around money? Like, does she need to do the same thing to have the impact with the nieces and nephews, or could she create something different? But no one had really asked her that question before and allowed her the space to create her own version of what this looked like.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's just like she probably just wanted to love her nieces and nephews. And it's just like, you know, I think a lot of us grow up thinking giving material things is showing love, but there could be other ways of showing love as well. So I love that.
Absolutely. And I mean, that was a hard lesson that I learned, was that, you didn't need to give someone the most expensive, best gift. I remember in college when I got my first credit card, because they were giving them away like candy, right? I was dating somebody at the time and it was his birthday, and I thought, "Oh, I'm going to go to the mall and get him like the best watch ever," because he was really into watches. And I racked up the entire, I used the entire available credit on that credit card to give somebody else. I dated for like a couple of months, this incredible gift. And, me now looks back and like, oh, girl, give yourself the watch if you're going to do it. Right. But yeah, these things are tricky to figure out, like, where do these beliefs come from? And I think the important thing is to think about, are they mine? Like, do they actually belong to me, or do they belong to someone else? Because if they belong to someone else, let me just give them back to them. Like, I don't need that. Let me create my own belief system and, get really like rooted and strong in what that is.
Absolutely. 100% to that. Okay. So one of the things you talk about is money trauma and perfectionism. So how does perfectionism keep so many people stuck, and how does trauma and money go together? Just explain it all to us, please.
Yeah, money trauma is this weird thing that is relatively new. I studied this for over a year, and really, I would argue I've been studying this for about 20 years, because every time I work with someone, it's almost more of a therapeutic role than it is a money expert role. Trauma is really this emotional pain or distress that comes from some negative money experience. Maybe it's poverty or debt or financial instability or financial abuse, but it could also be something like, again, maybe you forgot to pay a bill and your credit score dropped. And so every time you go to open your bank app, you feel that bodily sensation of like, oh my gosh, I bet I made a mistake again. And it causes this resistance in you. So I like to think of trauma as just this gunk that you feel inside of yourself. So if you notice yourself around a person or interacting with money in any way where you feel maybe your palms get sweaty or your heart starts racing or your shoulders get tight, I want you to notice those bodily sensations, because those are clues. They're trying to tell you something. And pause for a moment and say, okay, what is this? Where does this come from? Is this helping me? Is this hurting me? Like, see if you can unravel what's going on in that moment, because our bodies tell us faster than our brains do. So your body is going to tell you, like, uh-oh, something is not right here in this situation, or something's not right with this person. Let me investigate this and see what this is about, right? Because my whole thing around trauma and money in general is I just want to be able to try to release people from the chronic stress and mental load around money. And I've felt that for most of my life. So I feel this like calling to help other people, not wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning in sweats over, something about money. So perfectionism, I think, really ties in there, and it's almost a form of money trauma because you really believe that you're supposed to do things in this, perfect sequential order, and you're supposed to, dot all the I's, cross all the T's. And when you don't do that, it creates a trauma response in you. And, when we're in these like fight or flight feelings around money, we can't make good decisions. Where it's just impossible. Our brains can't function there. And so sometimes we end up, like I was saying before, undoing what we're trying to do. So there's an exercise. I have lots of exercises. If someone is up for this, it's called financial forgiveness, and it's super easy. Get out a blank sheet of paper, set your timer on your phone for 10 minutes. And without judgment, I want you to write down absolutely everything around money that you hate, that you wish you would have done different, that you feel was a mistake, that you're mad at this person, whatever it is. I want you to just get it out on paper. Walk away for 24 hours. Come back, read it with a fresh brain. And then the second part of it is I want you to get rid of it. Burn it, shred it, throw it away, tear it up. I don't care what you do, but there's a lot of scientific research behind getting something out on paper, handwriting it down, and then releasing it, right? It doesn't mean that all of it goes away, but what we're trying to do is, kind of flip a switch in your body and brain and say, okay, we don't have to live in that traumatic response place anymore. We could create a new interaction that comes from a healthier perspective.
Oh yeah, this is good. So I think I had some trauma. I think I've released it. But so back in the day when our money was a mess, I remember going to the grocery store, swiping my debit card because we both were just swiping, and it declining. And that was just the most embarrassing thing ever. I had another card that I used, but I knew the truth. I knew that I had overspent. I knew that this other card has money on it, but this is not the card I should be using either. And for years, every time I would go to the grocery store, even after we got out of debt, after we had plenty of money in the bank, even sometimes I catch myself, even now, having a little bit of anxiety at the grocery store when it's time to swipe. I'll even open up my bank app real quick and just double check, make sure there's money in there before I swipe. And I noticed it probably about a year ago. I'm like, why do I always check my online banking app before I swipe at the grocery store? It's because of that situation. So that trauma, that stress response, like that embarrassment was there.
That's such a perfect example. It could be, again, these big things, or it could be these things that somebody else might say, oh, you're fine. Like, that's not a big deal, right? But to you, you just felt this like terror moment. And your body, because it's stuck in you, it just keeps reliving that over and over and over again, right? Until I think what's beautiful about your story is you had this moment of recognition where you're like, oh, this is why this is happening. And that's what I want for people, is like to create these pause moments and say, wait a minute, like I could have a different experience, but let me figure out why this one is happening. That's such an important moment that I think we just tend to kind of gloss over, but there's a lot that's happening in that moment.
Yeah. So can you share, you said that the trauma is stuck in your body. Can you share some techniques if other people are experiencing money trauma, like some things they could do to get it unstuck?
Well, one, if you're really battling with this, there are money therapists, financial therapists that can absolutely help you. That is an option. Definitely my financial forgiveness exercise that I shared earlier. But a couple of other things, first, I want you to really just acknowledge your feelings as valid. Again, this is something we might brush over, but what you're feeling is super important to the whole process of releasing it. So I don't want you to overlook that place. Then I want you to, there's lots of exercises around mindfulness. One of the exercises I do is something called, I write myself a hey money letter every evening. So I have this blank journal and I'll write hey money, and then whatever comes to my mind that happened during the day, whether I'm mad at it, whether I had a good day, I'm cathartically releasing some of that energy around money and getting it out on paper. So when I go to bed, I'm not carrying that with me and sort of waking up the next morning. That's another exercise I do. But I think, I also want you to celebrate tiny, tiny, tiny wins. So if your fear is looking at the bank app on your phone, try for a second opening that app, looking at it, right? Like the smallest fraction of time, and then putting it back down. And after you do that, I want you to do something that feels really good for you, whether it's like go eat a piece of chocolate, go dance crazy in your house, go out for a walk, call a friend. But I want you to take these little tiny micro baby steps, because what they do is they start to tell your brain and body, okay, it's okay. Like we did it. We didn't die. We're good. We're still here, right? So rather than taking these big sweeping steps like, well, I'm just going to look at all my money, stuff in one day, that's not the right response. So take a little action, tiny action, and then I want you to, celebrate that. And the last thing I would say is think about the what I call the financial environment around you, right? So if you notice that around certain friends or certain people, you start to feel these emotions, I want you to think about whether this relationship, this interaction is healthy, right? Maybe there are certain friends that just trigger you. And, maybe when you're with them, you feel this desire to spend up to their level, right? So you feel socially accepted. That's something to really look into. There are two ways we could do this. Obviously, one, we could decide not to spend as much time around this person. The other one is we could take a really bold, brave step and be super transparent about what you're feeling. And actually doing that, as scary as it might sound, releases a whole lot of energy that's kind of stored up in you. So those are just a couple of things to try, but I want you to avoid the like giant sweeps of, well, I'll just do it differently, right? It's just too much when we're in this place of fight or flight around money.
So good. So that kind of brings us to shame, because you do talk about shame quite a bit in the book, and how shame and secrecy when it comes to money, it fuels negative money patterns. Why do you think so many people feel ashamed about their financial situation, and how can they start to let go of that shame?
I think shame comes from everything around us. I mean, if you watch TV for even like a half hour and you watch the commercials, there are so many commercials around money or money concepts that are written from a shame perspective, because they know that fear sells. Like fear grabs people's attention, it motivates people. So I think shame is just part of the conversation. There are a lot of money experts out there, won't name any names, who operate from a very shame centered perspective, because that's what goes viral. That's what gets people talking. And I just choose not to do that, because I feel like we just have so much of it already. And then I think as women, we have a lot that we're grappling with all the time of, should we be breadwinners? Should we not? Should we stay home and take care of the kids? Should we be spending money on things like haircuts and nails? Should we not? Should we, there's just so much bundled up in it. Men have their own version of shame around money for sure. But I think as women, we have a lot that we're just constantly wrestling with. So I feel like it's just at this forefront of everything that we do. And it's kind of coming at us from almost an unconscious programming level. And that's why it's just so difficult to get around it. But I think I talk a lot about this concept called healthy wealth, which is deciding the version of wealth that you want, deciding what enough means in your life, deciding what your vision of life looks like. Because until you do that, you're never going to know if you're going in that direction. And you're always going to feel a sense of like, well, I should have done that, or I feel shameful about this or shameful about that. And that has taken me years and years to try to get to a place where I unravel my own shame around money and can stand in a place where, I'm willing to share secrets. And I think the secrecy is like what keeps the shame locked up. If you go on social media, right, you see people like, oh, I made $1 million in my business and I passed six figures and I made this much. That is a breeding ground for shame, right? Because you instantly compare yourself. But I think if we started to talk from a healthy perspective about the things that we haven't done right around money, that there would be a lot less shame because we'd all realize like, oh, you did that too? So did I. Like, oh my gosh. Okay, well, I'm not alone any longer in this place of shame.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that, there are so many financial experts telling us how we should be doing everything. And then when you're not doing it their way, that breeds shame. And I like how you talk about like, there's no right way. There are no rules. You get to create your own rules.
I think that's what probably makes money so tricky for people is everybody wants to know, like, just give me the roadmap, like, just give me. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. Where do you want to live? How do you want to spend your life? There isn't this one set of rules. There are some principles that are healthy. We could talk about like building a good foundation, but there aren't there isn't this checklist that I could give every single human. And then when they, have done these things, I like give them a certificate of like, congratulations, you're now successful with money. It just doesn't work that way. And so that's why I really want everyone to lean into what does money success look like for you? What is enough for you? What is the number that would bring happiness in your life? That's what I want you to focus on because that creates the roadmap that you should be following and not someone else.
Well, that brings us to the money happiness number. So you talk about the study. I think we've all seen this study that like, oh, $75,000, that's the magic number. When you hit that, then you'll be happy. So can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit of BS, right? Obviously there's inflation and all sorts of things. And, again, it's super personalized. Like one person might say $75,000. Oh my gosh. Like I feel rich at 75,000. And someone else might say, oh my gosh, I couldn't live on 75,000. So that money happiness number is this just principle of figuring out how much money do you need to live the version of life you want to live. And if you're not at that number yet, are there any changes you can make that are going to move you closer to that, right? Some people want to live, a very minimalistic life. They might not need a lot of money every month. That might not be a priority. Other people might want to live in big cities or, they might want to travel the world and they might need a different number to reach that level of money happiness. But until you know what your number is, you're going to be chasing everyone else's number and you're never going to feel like you get there. And so, I think that we need to focus almost less on the number and more on like, what does that version of life look like? And then we start, plugging the number in to see where you're at.
So good. And I just get so annoyed by the news articles that say, oh, if you make six figures, that's not enough anymore. And, and then it just makes people feel like, again, the shame, like, oh, I'm not making enough. And so I love that you empower people to pick the number that works for them by first deciding what they want, what lifestyle they want, how do they want to live, and then going from there.
Yeah, I literally want this book to be like a permission slip for everyone reading it to go, okay, I don't have to be stuck in this stressful, anxiety ridden place any longer. Let me sit down and without bringing the numbers in at first, let me just figure out what the heck I want. Like, what do I really want to do in life? Am I doing it? Maybe I'm not. What can I do, as a life coach, like what can I do to change things and to have some sort of like power and ownership of that? Then we'll bring in the numbers and figure out, what we need to fill in the gap. But that's the easy part.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so you introduced a concept in the book called the goal gap. Can you break that concept down a little bit for us so we can know exactly what that is?
Yeah, so the goal gap is really, I'll use my bridge analogy. Like, let's say we're on one side of the bridge and we have this money goal that we want to get to. And no matter what we do, like, we cannot get to the other side of that bridge. Like, we just cannot reach this thing. Again, whether it's paying off debt or starting a business or buying a house or wanting to retire early, whatever it is, like, and we're just stuck. Like, what is going on? Like, that is the goal gap. There's something in the middle there that we need to pay attention to. So, I use the debt example a lot because I think it's something that a lot of us can relate to. And a lot of times, people will come to me like, I want to pay off debt. Great, great, great. There's like 5,000 steps before that we need to talk about because we need to really look at your relationship around spending money and set some intentional spending boundaries, if you will, or rules or whatever word works for you, right? And we need to do that first. Then we'll get to the actual strategy piece around paying off the debt. But what happens a lot of times is people will get close to that other side of the bridge. They'll start to pay off their debt and then boomerang back, right? And they're like, why is this happening? I made good money. I just don't understand it. And the goal gap really circles all the way back to the thoughts and the kind of programming that we have around money. And I think it's more of a conversation around our self-worth and how we tie our self-worth to money. And, there's also that, if we're talking about spending money, there's also that emotional component. Like, there's a dopamine hit when you spend money. I get it. I love it sometimes too. Absolutely. Right. So maybe there's a way we could still get a dopamine hit and not pull us back, from the other side of the bridge. So the goal gap is really when you notice that you want to get somewhere and you're not getting there, it's figuring out what is that missing piece? Like, what is going on that's stopping that progress from happening? And we don't like to spend time there because that requires some sort of like a come to Jesus moment, right? With ourselves of figuring out what's going on.
I love that you talked about the spending because sometimes I think that people, they put themselves on these really restrictive plans and then they do get close to their goal. And then, like you said, they boomerang back because the way they got there was unsustainable. That could be part of it. And then the other part is that they're still conditioned to be in debt. Their brains, are comfortable there. And it's just like, what are you doing? This is not us. We have debt. You're getting too close to not having debt. Let's go back. And so we sabotage ourselves to get right back to it. So I feel like, and that's the stuff you just don't hear about in the normal personal financial conversations, right?
Yeah, because, people come to you wanting to solve a problem, right? They want to get out of debt. They want to buy a house. They want to, retire. And so traditional money advice plays in that space. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you the plan to pay off debt, but you're going to come back to me like 3 months later and say this doesn't work or something happened or you got back in debt. So the work I do is really figuring out, okay, let's do the puzzle pieces before that, because those are the tools in the toolkit I want you to have. The debt paying off piece is the easiest piece. Once you have the tools in the toolkit of how to deal with this emotionally, because you're right, we get stuck in the comfortable places. And even though we don't like it, we want to be out of debt. Being in debt is comfortable. It's what our body and brain knows. And your brain's lazy. It likes comfortable. And so it's going to do what it needs to do to keep you in that spot. And you really have to, again, it's like pushing, boulder uphill. You have to introduce some different things in the equation to really change that. And to me, that's the work that most money experts, they're just not even trained to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think that is a great place to just really say that they need your book. This is why they need your book. But before you tell us how to get our hands on it, I wanted to do like a rapid fire Q&A with you real quick. So, ready?
Let's go.
Okay. So, what's the biggest money mistake you ever made that completely just kind of derailed you? And how did you learn from it?
I would say buying that watch for my boyfriend in college was the first taste of debt. And if I would have, I think, had a better like comprehension of how my emotion was playing into that decision, I think it would have changed like my entire financial trajectory.
Yes, that's a good one. Okay, so what's one financial belief you used to have that you've completely changed your mind about?
I used to believe that my worth equaled my bank account balance, that if I on the outside appeared financially altogether, that was a reflection of who I was as a human being. And I can't tell you that is farther from the truth.
Oh, that is so important for everybody to know. Like our self-worth, I like to say this, my self-worth, your self-worth is the same as Beyonce's and Oprah's. Like we're all worthy equally. Now, the net worth, that's a different story, but that has nothing to do with our self-worth. And I had to do a lot of work around that. I'm still working on that to remind myself, like, no, you are worthy. It doesn't matter what your net worth is, what your bank account is, what purse you carry, what house you live in, what's your zip code. None of that matters. And that is so important, even more today than ever, I believe.
1,000%. And I'm right there with you. I'm still doing that work.
Yes. Okay. Question number 3, and this is the final one. If you could put one message about money on a billboard for the world to see, what would it say?
I think it would say something like, what is enough for you?
Mm.
All of the women over 20 years that I've worked with, the first thing that almost, I would say 99% of women say to me is, I fear there's never enough, some version of that. And my kind of quip back is, okay, well, do you know what is enough? Because if we don't know what our enoughness looks like, and I'm not just talking money here, I'm talking everything, we will always feel like we never have enough. So I think it's really important to figure out what that is for you. And that is your like put the blinders up direction that I want you to go in.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay. So now please tell my listeners how they can get their hands on your book and stay connected to you.
I would love for you to pick up the book. You can buy the book absolutely everywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indiegogo, you name it, Books A Million. You can check out my podcast, Everyone's Talking Money, literally the same place that you're listening to this show right now.
Awesome. And I'll put any links you have in the show notes so people can go right and snag the book. You guys, this is such a good read and it will literally change how you think about money, and it will really empower you to build the wealth that you desire to build, because that's why you're listening to this podcast. So I hope you all have an amazing week. Any last words, Shannah?
No, I just want everyone to go out there and build what I call unapologetic wealth. Like go out there, be you, figure out your enoughness, and let's all build wealth.
All right. I will see you all next week. Thanks again, Shannah.
Thank you.
Wait, before you go, have you checked out my free class? It's all about the steps you need to take if you want to build wealth without going on a strict budget. To sign up, simply go to jermainfoley.com/wealth class. That's Jermaine with a G, foley.com/wealth class. See you in there.